She was 65 years old, the most powerful woman on earth, sovereign of 16 nations, head of a Commonwealth spanning 2 billion people. And she looked at her mother and said, "But Mummy." Not mother, not ma'am, Mummy. The way a 5-year-old says it, that soft British emphasis stretching the word out like taffy. And here's the thing nobody talks about when this clip goes viral every few months. The content of their disagreement was absolutely ridiculous. It was about her eyes watering at a horse race. The Queen Mother apparently noticed Elizabeth's eyes looked wet, maybe from wind, maybe from emotion, who knows, and said something about it. Elizabeth disagreed. And what came out of the monarch's mouth was the most childlike word in the English language. The clip is from the 1991 Epsom Derby, captured by BBC cameras filming a documentary called Elizabeth R. that would air the following year. The palace had granted unprecedented access for the production, which meant cameras followed the Queen everywhere, including to one of her favorite places on earth, the racecourse at Epsom Downs. That day in June, both Elizabeths were there watching the horses parade before the race. They were discussing one of the Queen's horses, Landau, and its chances in the upcoming race. The Queen Mother was 90 years old. Her daughter, the reigning monarch for 39 years, was 65. And for a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. The institution vanished. What remained was simply a daughter who disagreed with her mother about something trivial, watery eyes for heaven's sake, and reached instinctively for the same word she'd used when she was a toddler at 17 Bruton Street in Mayfair, before the crown, before the duty, before everything. When people watch this clip now, they don't mock it. They don't analyze it for signs of royal dysfunction. They recognize themselves in it. Because here's the validation nobody asked for, but everybody needed. No matter how old you get, no matter how much power you accumulate, no matter how many nations bow before you, when your mother is in the room, you are still, fundamentally, her child. You're still the kid who says, "Mummy." To understand why the Elizabeth R. documentary matters, you have to understand what the palace was trying to accomplish in 1991. And to understand that, you have to go back to 1969. That year, the royal family made what many consider their greatest mistake. They allowed BBC and ITV cameras behind the scenes for a documentary called Royal Family, which followed them for an entire year. The film was watched by 30 million people in Britain alone, roughly 3/4 of the adult population. The footage showed something unprecedented. The Windsors acting like an ordinary family, Prince Philip flipping burgers at a Balmoral barbecue, the Queen browsing in a shop, actually paying for things with money like a regular person, young Prince Charles mixing salad dressing in the kitchen, the family sitting around watching television together, making jokes, teasing each other. The public ate it up. How could they not? After centuries of royal mystique, here was proof that the people who lived in palaces also ate sausages and argued about what to watch on the telly. Prince Philip thought it was a disaster. He believed, and events would prove him at least partially right, that the monarchy's power depended on its mystery. The moment you show the Queen buying ice cream, you make it impossible for people to see her as something separate from ordinary humanity. The magic only works if the audience can't see the wires. Once 30 million Britons watched the royal family bicker over salad dressing, the illusion cracked. The 1969 documentary is widely credited with beginning the erosion of royal mystique that would accelerate through the following decades. It taught the tabloids that there was an appetite for behind-the-scenes royal content, an appetite that would eventually become insatiable, feeding on divorces and affairs and intercepted phone calls. The film that was supposed to humanize the monarchy instead taught the public to demand more and more access, until access became intrusion, and intrusion became harassment. For over 2 decades after 1969, the palace resisted calls for another documentary. But by 1991, the calculus had changed. Elizabeth had been on the throne for nearly 40 years. A new generation had grown up knowing nothing but her reign, and that generation was increasingly indifferent to the monarchy. The Diana phenomenon had shifted attention away from the Queen herself. The palace needed to remind people why they should care about the woman who actually wore the crown. Elizabeth II was designed to mark her 40th year as sovereign and to present the Queen as a working monarch, dedicated, tireless, human in her warmth, but superhuman in her commitment to duty. The gamble was that they could show enough to satisfy curiosity without showing so much that the mystique dissolved entirely. A controlled glimpse behind the curtain. The timing seemed perfect. In 1991, the royal family appeared stable. Charles and Diana's marriage was troubled. Insiders knew it was in serious trouble, but the full extent of the dysfunction wasn't yet public. The documentary would show Elizabeth at her best, reviewing papers at her desk, meeting with prime ministers, traveling the Commonwealth, attending her beloved horse races with her mother by her side. Nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew that 1992 would become what Elizabeth herself would later call her annus horribilis, Latin for horrible year. A phrase she used in a speech marking her 40th anniversary as queen, delivered with visible exhaustion, acknowledging that the year had not been one she would look back on with undiluted pleasure. The phrase was an understatement. On March 19, 1992, Buckingham Palace announced that the Duke and Duchess of York, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, were separating. The tabloids feasted on photographs of Fergie having her toes sucked by her financial advisor in the south of France. The humiliation was total and public. In June, Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, was published, revealing for the first time the full extent of Diana's unhappiness, her bulimia, her suicide attempts, the existence of Camilla Parker Bowles as the third person in the marriage. Diana had cooperated secretly with the book, and suddenly the fairy tale the world had believed in was exposed as a nightmare. In August, the Squidgygate tapes emerged, recordings of intimate phone conversations between Diana and a male friend, conversations in which he called her Squidgy, and she complained bitterly about the royal family. Shortly after came Camillagate, transcripts of phone calls between Charles and Camilla that were so explicitly romantic they made international headlines. The Prince of Wales, heir to the throne, recorded telling his mistress he wanted to be reincarnated as her tampon. And then, on November 20th, 1992, Windsor Castle caught fire. The blaze started in the Queen's private chapel when a spotlight ignited a curtain during renovation work. It burned for 15 hours. Over 200 firefighters battled flames that consumed or damaged more than 100 rooms, including 9 staterooms and St. George's Hall. Millions of gallons of water were pumped into the castle. The damage was estimated at £37 million. Elizabeth arrived while the castle was still burning. She was photographed standing in the rain, wearing a headscarf and a dark coat, watching her home, the place where she'd spent much of her childhood, where her father had died, where 8 centuries of British history were concentrated, go up in flames. She looked, for the first time anyone could remember, defeated. 4 days later, she gave her annus horribilis speech. In December, Buckingham Palace announced that Charles and Diana were separating. The fairy tale was officially dead. Which means this: the "but mummy" clip, this tiny moment of warmth between mother and daughter at the Epsom Derby, was broadcast to millions of viewers at almost exactly the moment the family began its most public unraveling. The documentary aired in February 1992. Within weeks, everything started falling apart. The mummy exchange became a kind of time capsule, a glimpse of something genuine, preserved just before the institution would spend years fighting for its relevance. Looking back, it feels almost prophetic, the last moment of peace before the storm. To understand the mummy moment, though, you need to understand who the Queen Mother actually was. Not the historical figure, not the Dowager Queen, the person. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on August 4, 1900, the ninth of 10 children at Glamis Castle in Scotland. The castle was a sprawling medieval fortress that came complete with its own legend about a monster in a hidden room, the kind of place that breeds eccentrics and survivors. From the beginning, she was known for her charm, her humor, and her absolute refusal to take anything too seriously. She wasn't born royal. She married into it. And she apparently wasn't thrilled about the prospect. The story goes that she turned down Prince Albert, the future King George VI, twice before finally accepting him in 1923. She wrote to a friend that she had no wish to be a queen. She was reluctant, she explained, to give up her freedom for the constraints of royal life. Think about that for a moment. A woman who actively didn't want to be queen, who valued her independence over a crown, who only agreed to marry Albert because she loved him, not because she wanted what came with him. The universe, as it tends to do, had other plans. When Edward VIII abdicated on December 11, 1936, to marry Wallis Simpson, Elizabeth's husband became king. The couple she blamed for this, Edward and Wallis, became permanent targets of her resentment. She called Wallis Simpson "that woman" for the rest of her life, refusing to use her name even in private. Some historians suggest she referred to Wallis as the rat of the week in family correspondence, though the palace has never confirmed this. What's certain is that she never forgave them for the burden they placed on her stammering, reluctant husband, a man who had never expected or wanted to rule. She believed, probably correctly, that the stress of kingship shortened his life. He died at 56, worn down by the responsibilities that should have been his brother's. The Queen Mother lived another 50 years, and she spent a fair portion of them refusing to be in the same room as the Duchess of Windsor. But whatever her private resentments, she rose to the public occasion with characteristic defiance. During the Blitz, she refused to leave London. The royal family could have retreated to Canada, as some advisors suggested. They could have waited out the war in safety while London burned. Instead, Elizabeth insisted on staying. When Buckingham Palace was bombed on September 13, 1940, 9 bombs fell on the building, destroying the chapel. She famously declared she was glad because it means I can look the East End in the face. The working-class neighborhoods of East London had been taking the worst of the German bombing raids. Entire streets were reduced to rubble. Families were sleeping in underground stations. And here was the Queen Consort, whose palace had been targeted by the Luftwaffe, touring the wreckage in heels and pearls. She visited bombed neighborhoods regularly throughout the war. The routine became almost ceremonial. The Queen would arrive, pick her way through the debris, speak with survivors, shake hands, offer comfort. She always dressed elegantly. This was deliberate. She believed the British people deserved to see their queen looking like a queen, not a refugee. The message was clear. We will not be cowed. We will not be diminished. We will dress for dinner even as the bombs fall. She brought her daughters into the effort. On October 13, 1940, 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth made her first radio broadcast, speaking to the children of the Commonwealth as part of the BBC's Children's Hour program. Her 10-year-old sister Margaret sat beside her in the studio. Elizabeth's voice was steady, her words carefully scripted, but delivered with genuine warmth. We know, every one of us, that in the end, all will be well. The broadcast was the Queen Mother's idea. She understood instinctively that the royal family's value during wartime was symbolic. They represented continuity, stability, the promise that Britain would survive. Her daughters, speaking calmly to the nation's children while bombs fell on London, were a message. The future is safe. We're not going anywhere. Winston Churchill called her the most dangerous woman in Europe, supposedly because he believed her resolve stiffened British resistance to Hitler. Whether the quote is apocryphal or not, it captures something true about her character. She was steel wrapped in silk, absolutely immovable when she chose to be, and yet capable of making everyone around her feel at ease. Her reputation for enjoying life was not gossip. It was documented. Well documented. According to those who knew her reported daily routine included a gin and Dubonnet before lunch, wine with the meal, a dry martini at 6 in the evening, and 2 glasses of Veuve Clicquot champagne with dinner. This wasn't excessive by her standards. It was steady. One observer described her as maintaining this regimen with the discipline of an athlete training for competition. She kept it up well into her 90s. She loved horses, loved racing, loved the social whirl of aristocratic life. One writer observed that she was a heavy drinker who lived to see 101 years, which is either a cautionary tale or an endorsement, depending on your perspective. She seemed to view life as something to be enjoyed rather than endured, and she pursued enjoyment with impressive consistency. Her sense of humor was described as impish and sly by those who observed it up close. She was the kind of woman who could make a joke at her own expense and then immediately pivot to making sure everyone else was having a good time. She understood instinctively that charm is a form of power, perhaps the only form of power available to a woman in the early 20th century who didn't want to rely on anger or manipulation. This was not a woman who would be cowed by protocol or impressed by titles, not even the title her own daughter held. Here's what makes the mother-daughter dynamic so fascinating. Technically, by every rule of royal protocol, the Queen Mother owed her daughter deference. After King George VI died in his sleep at Sandringham on February 6, 1952, Princess Elizabeth became Queen Elizabeth II. She was 25 years old, on a royal tour in Kenya, watching wildlife from a treehouse at the Treetops Hotel when it happened. She went up that tree a princess and came down a queen, though she wouldn't learn of her father's death for several hours. In that instant, the dynamic between mother and daughter shifted completely. The daughter was now monarch. The mother was now subject. Royal protocol is explicit about this, and the rules are not suggestions. Nobody may turn their back on the reigning sovereign. Nobody may leave a room before the sovereign chooses to leave. Nobody may sit while the sovereign stands. Nobody may speak to the sovereign unless the sovereign speaks first. These rules exist to maintain the dignity of the crown and to ensure that no one forgets, even for a moment, who holds supreme authority. The Queen Mother, as a former queen consort and the mother of the reigning monarch, technically owed all these courtesies to her own daughter. Every time they were in a room together, the older woman should have waited for the younger to sit first, speak first, leave first. For 50 years after 1952, the Queen Mother should have treated her daughter as her sovereign. But something in their relationship resisted such formality. Reports suggest that the younger Elizabeth made exceptions for her mother that she made for nobody else. The image that emerges from biographers and royal watchers is of the Queen Mother sweeping into rooms ahead of Elizabeth, treating the palace as if she still ran it, while Elizabeth simply let her. Whatever protocol demanded on paper, in practice the older woman remained, in some fundamental way, in charge of their relationship. This wasn't weakness on Elizabeth's part. It was a choice. The queen who could freeze foreign dignitaries with a single glance, who could reduce prime ministers to nervous wrecks with her silences, who maintained iron discipline over her emotions for 7 decades. That woman chose to let her mother break every rule. because some relationships exist outside the structures we build to govern everything else. The Queen Mother could have retreated into obscurity after her husband's death. Many dowager queens do. Instead, she reinvented herself, insisting on being called the Queen Mother rather than the Dowager Queen Elizabeth, and proceeded to live for another 50 years with the same energy she'd always had. She moved to Clarence House, established her own court, continued her charitable work, maintained her social calendar with undiminished enthusiasm, and she kept treating her daughter like her daughter. Royal biographers have noted that Queen Elizabeth II seemed to inherit her mother's sense of humor about herself. Whatever wit the daughter possessed, she learned it watching the mother. The two women shared a passionate love of horses and racing, spending countless hours together at events like the Epsom Derby, discussing bloodlines and breeding with the intensity of professional bettors. Which is how, on a June day in 1991, they ended up side by side at Epsom Downs, arguing about watery eyes. The linguistic choice of mummy versus mother is not accidental. And it's not meaningless. In British English, particularly among the upper classes, the terms carry distinct emotional weights. Mother is formal, distanced, appropriate for public settings or for relationships that have calcified into politeness. It's the word you use when you're announcing something to a room. Mummy is intimate, warm, childlike. It's the word children use before they learn to be embarrassed by needing their mothers. The Guardian once ran a piece asking, "Is it okay for adults to still say mummy?" The answer, it turns out, depends entirely on your social context. In certain British circles, particularly among the aristocracy and upper middle class, continuing to use mummy and daddy well into adulthood is perfectly normal. It's not a sign of arrested development. It's a marker of a certain kind of upbringing, a signal that you come from the sort of family where formality exists for the outside world, but not within the home. In other contexts, it might seem childish or affected. A 40-year-old in a working-class pub calling their mother mummy would get strange looks. But in the world Elizabeth inhabited, a world of country estates and private schools and family titles going back centuries, the word carried no embarrassment. Elizabeth's use of the word was neither a slip nor an affectation. It was simply what she called her mother, what she had always called her mother, what she would continue calling her until the day that mother died. Think about what that means. This woman had been queen for nearly 4 decades. She had met with prime ministers from Winston Churchill to Margaret Thatcher, and was working her way toward John Major. She had witnessed the dissolution of the British Empire, watching colony after colony gain independence, while she transformed the empire into the Commonwealth. She had navigated scandals, constitutional crises, the rise of television, the death of the old deference that had once shielded the monarchy from scrutiny. She had trained herself to reveal almost nothing of her inner life to the public. Biographers struggled to describe her personality because she had so deliberately obscured it. One analysis noted that the British Queen has not given many personal insights into her character. She was, by design, unknowable, a symbol rather than a person. The crown made flesh. Yet with her mother, she reached instinctively for mummy. The word is a window into a world the public almost never saw. A world where Elizabeth was not a sovereign, not Her Majesty, not even the Queen. She was someone's daughter, someone's little girl. Someone who could be contradicted about whether her eyes were watering without any constitutional crisis resulting. Someone who could push back with a "but" that would be unthinkable from anyone else speaking to the Queen of England. The fact that her private vocabulary with her mother had never evolved past that childhood intimacy tells you everything about what their relationship actually was. Not subject and sovereign, mother and child, mummy and daughter. forever. This usage, it turns out, runs in the family. When Prince Andrew paid tribute to Queen Elizabeth II after her death in September 2022, he used the same word. His public statement referred to his mummy, not his mother, and the press reported it without surprise. King Charles III, in his first speech as monarch, called Elizabeth his darling mama, another diminutive term of endearment that would seem odd in most contexts, but felt natural when describing the loss of a parent. The Windsors, it seems, are a family of mummies and mamas and darlings, at least in private, and occasionally, when the cameras catch them off guard, in public too. Which raises an interesting question. What other families are like this? The answer, of course, is almost all of them. Most people don't announce their private terms of endearment to the world. Most 50-year-olds don't get filmed calling their mothers mummy at horse races, but the instinct is universal. The dynamic is eternal. Somewhere right now, there's a corporate executive in their 60s visiting their elderly mother and reverting, within minutes, to whatever childhood patterns were established decades ago. The voice changes, the posture shifts, vocabulary regresses. The competent adult who runs meetings and signs contracts and makes decisions affecting thousands of people becomes, for a moment, just someone's kid. We don't talk about this much. It feels embarrassing, childish, like something we should have outgrown by the time we have children of our own. Certainly by the time those children have children. But the Queen of England hadn't outgrown it, and she was literally the most powerful woman on the planet. If Elizabeth, with all her discipline, all her training, all her awareness of cameras and public perception, still said mummy at 65, then maybe the rest of us can stop pretending we've evolved past needing our parents. Maybe the complicated feelings we have about our mothers, the irritation, the love, the desire to be seen as adults, the comfort of being someone's child, are not weaknesses to be overcome. Maybe they're just human. The contrast between Elizabeth's public persona and this private moment deserves attention. For 70 years, she presented the same face to the world, composed, controlled, revealing almost nothing. She perfected what royal observers called the mask, an expression of pleasant neutrality that could be maintained for hours at a time during ceremonies, state dinners, receiving lines. She learned to betray no reaction to provocation, no favoritism among her prime ministers, no opinion on the political controversies of the day. This discipline was not accidental. She had watched her uncle Edward VIII destroy his reign through impulsiveness and emotional decisions. She had seen how the press could weaponize any crack in the royal facade. She understood, perhaps better than anyone of her generation, that the modern monarchy survived on mystique. Give the public enough to admire, but never enough to truly know you. Show them the crown, the carriages, the ceremony, but keep the woman beneath it hidden. The result was a figure who seemed almost inhuman in her consistency. Prime ministers came and went. She met with 15 of them, from Churchill to Truss, and she remained the same. Wars began and ended. Technology transformed daily life beyond recognition. The empire dissolved and reformed as something else. Through all of it, Elizabeth's public face never changed. Biographers have noted how difficult it is to write about her interior life, precisely because she left so little evidence of it. She gave almost no interviews. Her speeches were carefully scripted. Her letters, what few have been released, maintain the same measured tone as her public statements. Which is why the mummy clip matters so much. For a fraction of a second, we see someone else. Not the monarch, the daughter. A 65-year-old woman disagreeing with her 90-year-old mother about something completely trivial and reaching for the word she's used her entire life. The mask slips. The institution vanishes. What's left is just a person connected to another person by the oldest bond there is. The clip's power comes from its rarity. In 7 decades of public life, there are almost no other moments like it. Elizabeth gave the world the crown and withheld the woman. But at Epsom in 1991, the woman leaked through. The 21st century was not kind to the Queen Mother's family. She entered 2002 having already outlived her husband by 50 years. She had seen her daughter reign for half a century. She had witnessed the rise and fall of empires and technologies unimaginable to the woman born in the Victorian era. She was 101 years old, still sharp, still engaged, still reportedly enjoying her daily gin and Dubonnet. Then, on February 9, 2002, Princess Margaret died. Margaret was 71, the Queen Mother's younger daughter, the sister Elizabeth had grown up with, played with, sheltered during the Blitz, watched make mistakes and recover from them. Margaret had struggled with health problems for years, heavy smoking, strokes. But her death was still a blow. The Queen Mother attended the funeral at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. She looked diminished for the first time anyone could remember. The woman who had survived the Blitz, who had outlived nearly everyone of her generation, who had seemed somehow immune to the passage of time, finally looked her age. 7 weeks later, on March 30th, 2002, at 3:15 in the afternoon, the Queen Mother died peacefully at Royal Lodge in Windsor. Elizabeth was with her. Her niece and longtime lady-in-waiting, Margaret Rhodes, had spent every day with the Queen Mother that March, watching her decline. The woman who had been Queen Consort, who had defied the Blitz, who had drunk champagne and backed horses and treated her monarch daughter like her daughter, had finally reached the end. She was 101 years old. The official cause of death was extreme old age. For Elizabeth, this was a double blow in less than 2 months. She had lost her sister and her mother in quick succession, the two people who had known her before she was queen, who remembered her as a girl, who called her Lilibet instead of ma'am. The two people who could still make her feel like someone's sister, someone's daughter, rather than an institution made flesh. Whatever grief she felt, she contained it. Her public statements were measured, appropriate, royal. If she wept in private. The mask never slipped. The Queen Mother's funeral took place on April 9, 2002, at Westminster Abbey. More than 1 million people lined the streets as her coffin was transported from Westminster Hall, where she had lain in state for 3 days, while 200,000 mourners filed past. The coffin was draped in her personal standard and topped with a wreath of white flowers, and resting on a velvet cushion, her coronation crown, the one made in 1937 with the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond at its center. The service was traditional, Anglican, exactly what she would have wanted. But it was the private moments that carried the weight. As the coffin was carried out of the abbey, a lone piper played "The Flowers of the Forest," the Scottish lament traditionally played at funerals of significant Scots. The Queen Mother had been born in Scotland, at Glamis Castle, over a century before. The music carried her home. She was buried beside her husband in the King George VI Memorial Chapel at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. 50 years after his death, they were together again. The little girl from Glamis Castle was finally at rest. The public response was respectful but restrained. She was, after all, 101 years old. She had lived a full life. Her death, while sad, felt like the natural conclusion of a long story, rather than a tragedy cut short. The nation mourned, but it did not grieve the way it would grieve 20 years later. For the next 2 decades, Elizabeth ruled alone. Not alone in the sense of lacking family. She had Philip until April 2021, and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would climb on her lap and call her Gan-Gan. But alone in the sense of being the oldest generation, the one everyone else looked to, the matriarch with no matriarch above her. For 20 years, there was no one left who could call her by her childhood name without permission, no one who remembered her before the crown, no one who could tell her to stop rubbing her watery eyes and expect to be taken seriously. She carried on, of course. Carrying on was what she did. She celebrated her Golden Jubilee in 2002, just months after losing her mother and sister. Her Diamond Jubilee in 2012. Her Sapphire Jubilee in 2017, marking 65 years on the throne. And finally, her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, marking 70 years, the first British monarch in history to reach that milestone. She watched her children's marriages dissolve, weathered scandals that would have destroyed lesser institutions, adapted to a world that changed faster than any of her predecessors could have imagined. She was photographed with American presidents from Truman to Biden. She met with prime ministers who weren't born when she took the throne. She became the most recognizable woman on earth, her face printed on currency and stamps across dozens of nations. But she was never again anyone's child. The woman who had once said, "But Mummy," in a moment of disagreement, had no one left to disagree with in that particular way. Whatever she felt about this loss, she kept to herself. On September 8, 2022, at 3:10 in the afternoon, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle in Scotland. She was 96 years old. She had reigned for 70 years and 214 days, longer than any other British monarch in history. Her death was announced via a brief statement from Buckingham Palace, and the nation, indeed much of the world, paused to absorb the news. The response was different from 2002. People wept openly. Flowers piled up outside palace gates. The funeral queue, yes, there was a queue, a very British queue, stretched for miles along the Thames. People waited 10, 12, 14 hours just to walk past her coffin in Westminster Hall. They weren't mourning a centenarian who'd lived a full life. They were mourning the only constant most of them had ever known. An era had ended. The clip of Elizabeth saying, "But Mummy," at the Epsom Derby has found new resonance since both women's deaths. What was once a charming curiosity, look, even the Queen bickers with her mother, has become something more precious. It's a glimpse into a relationship that no longer exists on this earth. Two women, a mother and daughter. One born in the Victorian era, one who would live to see the age of smartphones and social media. One who spent 50 years as the only person who could still call the Queen her little girl. When the clip circulates now, people don't just smile at it. They feel something. Recognition, maybe. Validation, certainly. The permission to acknowledge that their own complicated feelings about their mothers, the eye-rolling, the tenderness, the instinct to push back on the smallest things, are not signs of immaturity. They're signs of love. The most powerful woman in the world said "Mummy" at 65 because that's who her mother was. Not a dowager queen, not a historical figure. Mummy. And now when people comment on the video, you see the same words appearing over and over. "This makes me miss my mum." Called my mom after watching this. We never stop being their children. That's the real gift of this clip. Not the royal access, not the protocol breaking, not even the humor of a 60-something woman arguing with her 90-year-old mother about watery eyes at a horse race. It's the permission. Permission to be someone's kid, no matter how old you get. Permission to use the childish words. Permission to acknowledge that growing up doesn't mean growing out of the fundamental truth that once someone held you when you were small, and you never quite forget what that felt like. Elizabeth ruled for 70 years. She met 15 prime ministers. She adapted a medieval institution to the modern age. She was, by most measures, the most successful monarch in British history. And she called her mother Mummy. If that's not permission, I don't know what is. Both Elizabeths are gone now. The Queen Mother died in March 2002 at 101. Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022 at 96. Mother and daughter, separated by 20 years, together again now. Just mum and daughter. Finally. Subscribe for more stories like this.